being here at this time, it's improbable. And yet, here we are, together.
Being a part of a crew, being where you need to be, when you need to be, that's Starfleet.
Last dance. I shall follow your lead.
You know, as a lifelong Star Trek fan, it is so rewarding and amazing to see where the franchise is right now. Like, Star Trek Discovery just wrapped up after a very successful 5-season run. Star Trek Strange New Worlds has finished its 2nd season and has hit its stride, is so beloved. It's amazing though, because like 10 years ago, there was no Star Trek on the air at that point. And now it's like this flourishing renaissance. How amazing is it for you, Alex, to see this spring up and to have been a driver of this?
It's been amazing. It's been an amazing, incredible ride for everybody. I don't think we envisioned when we started Discovery that it was going to become, 6 television shows and a movie. I think as a fan of Star Trek to be able to see so many different corners of the universe expanding and expanding, I think what it's only affirmed for me is that it is one of those truly rare and precious gems that is a limitless well of storytelling to draw from. You could go on forever and ever and ever. And so then the question becomes, how do you do it, and how do you keep it fresh and original, and make sure that each show feels different from every other show. But it's been a total joy and an amazing, partnership with so many extraordinary artists. I
mean, Jason, we just got a glimpse of some of your handiwork there, some of the amazing VFX work that you have spearheaded with your team. I look at these shows and they are so cinematic and they have such a sweep to them in a way that, growing up with Star Trek, that wasn't necessarily always the case, and to see just the expansiveness and the epic feel that you've given to this, like, how important has it been for you to evolve the look of Star Trek?
Well, I think it's very important. First of all, Trek has such a legacy, not just in television, but also in visual effects in general. It was always sort of at the cutting edge of visual effects. And, even back in the day, the things that they were doing at the time were the absolute newest technologies. And so I think for us coming back into the Trekverse now, we have all this new technology. And so every year we're constantly looking at different ways that we can sort of bring that in to make the story better, to make the show better, not for a spectacle, because you don't want to take everybody out of the story. Ultimately, we're still storytellers. But being able to use the latest technologies, if it's the virtual production stage, so that we can, explore alien planets more or something like that. It's constantly a challenge, I think, but having the ability to use all the technology and then having all these different shows to choose from, like Alex said, 12, 13 seasons, whatever it is we're working on. Every show has a different tone, a different story to tell. And so, we're very lucky to be able to play in a sandbox that seems to have unlimited potential.
Yeah, it's an incredible thing, because like when I was a kid growing up in the 90s with that incredible renaissance of Trek then, I would watch like Star Trek Deep Space Nine and some of those space battles, like with huge fleets and everything. I think, and literally thought for years, they're never going to top this. Like, they're never going to be space battles better than this. This is as good as it gets. This is a standard definition show, but obviously you have really eclipsed that. But how do you take like some of those elements? You were mentioning that like Star Trek is so, it has been at the cutting edge in the past of VFX. How do you like take some specific elements that have come before and build off them and turn them into something new?
Well, I think you always, the good thing again is you have 60 years of reference, right? So the first thing we do, even with the new script that doesn't seem to have as much to do with the past, we always go back and look at everything, see what the ships look like, see how they behave, because there are certain behaviors you still have to stick to. A starship is a massive thing. It needs to move like a battleship. It doesn't matter if it's doing that models or miniatures back in the day or if we're doing it digitally now. But we also have a lot of reference to choose from, and the ships are characters, and so we have to treat them with a certain amount of reverence in order to satisfy the fan base and at the same time tell the same story. So I think it's always born out of story. In the case of the Enterprise being more maneuverable, part of that is because the pilot is like the best pilot in the Federation at that time, right? So we're playing into what the story is asking for. And I think that's the importance of what we do, is not to just build spectacle for the sake of an incredible image, but to make sure that we're backing the story and telling the story that's supposed to be on the page.
And to that end, I think it's so impressive how you use references to Star Trek history and other alien species and events like the Breen and Star Trek Discovery, or the Gorn and Strange New Worlds, in a way that doesn't feel like Easter eggs or just shout outs, but like actually are meaningful parts of the story and the world building and the universe that this is being told within. How do you find that balance between like, oh, this is just like a shout out versus no, this is like a really meaningful reference needed for the story?
Well, there are lots of conversations in the writer's room about that very question. And if you take on something like the Breen, and there was obviously a lot of mystery about the Breen and what do they look like, you have to be able to answer that question, but you also have to choose the Breen because they operate a certain way that works for the story, right? So it was perfect for our Bonnie and Clyde story. You know, it was very interesting to make Locke part of the Breen, you know, as part of the reveal, and understand what that culture was suddenly all about. So it wasn't really just like, oh, fan service, which I think typically fan service can be very annoying, you know, and if you do it wrong and you're sort of tipping your hat to it, but you're not actually giving it any depth, it actually feels weirdly like it achieves the opposite of what you are intending to do. So you really need to come up with a very strong reason to do it.
I think it's also interesting because when you're depicting on Strange New Worlds, the USS Enterprise, like it looks like the bridge that we remember from the 60s show in a lot of ways, but given a 21st century polish. It's not like a reinvention of it. It's just like a polish. How did you go about like achieving that? Like you didn't want to reinvent the wheel with the design for the bridge and for the effects that accompany it. You want it to feel like, no, this is of a piece with the original series. Like The Cage with Christopher Pike and Jeffrey Hunter in the role back in the 60s, that could have been a pilot for Strange New Worlds, you know? Yeah. Jason, how do you approach those effects so it feels seamless?
Well, I mean, we always go back and watch. I mean, I've watched so many hours of Star Trek now, and there's still more to see. I mean, you've got so much reference to choose from. But I mean, I think part of it, too, is born out of, you know, if you just look at the technology of thing, everybody's got 4K, 8K TVs now, right? So the detail you have to put into the assets is incredible. And if you're going to add that much detail, you might as well make sure that it matches the original series. Really just going back, looking at everything that came before, and then knowing the delivery method, knowing the audience. I mean, the audience is a lot more, you know, visually, I think, educated than ever before. I mean, people know what good visual effects are, bad visual effects. My wife will tell you, we'll be watching TV and she'll look at me and go, that's a blue screen, right? You know, so like, I think everybody knows what looks good and what doesn't now. And so it requires us to spend more time because it's not just, you know, making sure that Alex is happy or that we're happy with it. It's like the fans have to be happy with it and they know what good visual effects are.
Well, and the other thing that's really interesting about that is, you know, at the same time, by giving it that upgrade, you don't want to make it seem like that the period you're depicting in Star Trek history, that it's suddenly more advanced than the way it's been depicted before. So how do you find that balance? Because I mean, obviously, yeah, 4K, 8K TVs, you want this to look as detailed as possible, but how do you make certain like, no, this is still the same level of tech that they had on the 60s show?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have a lot of people on our team that are Trek historians, and they keep us honest. I mean, we'll be in meetings or something. I mean, it happens almost every time where somebody say, "Well, what if it did this?" And they're like, "No, that's not at all what it does." And so, and we want that. We want them to keep us honest because otherwise, you will hear from it later, you know, with the fans and everything. And so, I think it's making sure that you know, you know the history, and if you don't know the history, somebody that you know standing next to you also knows the history. Unfortunately, for me and my team and Alex's team, there's plenty of Trek historians who will keep us honest.
And then there are some amazing moments that feel just wholly original. Like there's this, in the finale of Star Trek Discovery, there's this incredible fight scene that's like this MC Escher space where the characters are running on walls and gravity seems to be defied. How, you know, Jason and Alex, like when you guys were talking about that scene, I mean, how did you approach that? Because there's never been anything in Star Trek like that before.
I got to give a lot of credit to Tunde, our director and EP for Discovery. I don't think anybody prepares better than Tunde for an episode. And so I think we started talking about that 6 months in advance. I mean, we were having conversations, what it was going to look like, how they were going to move, you know, and so you just go through the steps. I mean, you start with the script and then you break it down into storyboards. And then once you have storyboards, you go like, how are we going to actually do this? How can we actually get this done? And there's always a moment of panic from us in visual effects where we're like, this is it. This is where we can't. This is where we break, you know? And And then they talk me off the ledge, and then we just break it down shot by shot. And in that case, when it's a 0G and all that, it's a lot of wires and preparation, and all the different departments come to play and bring their best. And that was another virtual production asset that we spent a long time on trying to get that right. And that allows us so much more of an expansive environment than having to worry about blue screens or counting shots. And so it really is, with the virtual production of it all, it's nice because it brings all of the departments together. Everybody is moving towards this common goal. It's a visual effects asset. It might be a visual effects environment, but everybody has a part to play, and it's stunts and it's props and it's everybody is affected by what that asset is. And so it's really fun because you have a million meetings, but you get the best results because everybody goes like, but what about this? And I'm like, okay, we have to solve that problem next. And so you kind of do it as a family.
Yeah, and that was a shout out there to Olatunde Osunsanmi, the amazing director who usually does the premiere episodes and finale episodes for each season of Discovery, and just gives an incredible cinematic sweep. It's so interesting, looking at the clips that we just did, they are two such distinct eras of Trek. Strange New Worlds is right around the time of the original series in the mid 23rd century. And then Discovery, is in the 32nd century, 900 years later. And the next show, Starfleet Academy, is going to be set then as well. You can just see how different the ships look and everything in the clips that we just saw. I'm curious, what was some of the design inspiration for some of the ships in the 32nd century? Did you look at some, there were some far future set episodes of Voyager that were in the 29th century, and Enterprise had some in the 31st. Did you look at those to sort of evolve those? Or?
Yeah, as Jason said, there's an army of people who pour over every aspect of every season, right? So you're always looking, well, what's the last closest era? What did we see there? And then how would we evolve from there? And then you want to also see the continuity from the Enterprise all the way to Discovery. You want to feel that each show in some form is represented in the sum total of what Discovery looks like, or what anything in the 32nd century looks like. We took a risk in the 32nd century because we started separating the ship parts in a way that hadn't been done before. And in Starfleet Academy, we will end up explaining how that works, which is actually interesting because one of the questions that we always ask ourselves is, what is the reality of this? Can't be magic. Right. So what's actually going on there?
The thing that's so great about Star Trek is that it also can house so many different genres. And of course, this past season on Strange New Worlds, everybody was obsessed with Subspace Rhapsody, the musical episode. I'm curious, Jason, had you ever done VFX for a musical episode before? And what was that approach like?
No, that was my first musical. It was hopefully not the last, but the first. It was fun. It's again story driven. So it's when we got into that, I think the fun part about that was sort of getting inside of Akiva's head and Henry and the showrunners and the writers and everything, and trying to hear what was your inspiration for this. What are we? Is it Busby Berkeley? What are the different musical references we can go back to? And we got to some really kind of obscure places with it. And then, they would give us a note and we would go away and animate a shot, and they'd be like, that's insane, don't do that. And then we'd have to go back and do it again. And so it was fun because it's you're not coming at it from necessarily just the story. There is sort of a performative nature to the ships. We saw a couple of shots up there that they're kind of dancing, and making a starship dance is not an easy thing to that's a tough thing to do. And so it was very iterative, a lot of versions of previs and everything, but it was fun. It was different for sure.
Oh, it's so cool. That episode was absolutely incredible. And I'm curious, you've been working on these shows for a good while now. What was your biggest challenge as VFX supervisor on Discovery to this point, and also on Strange New Worlds?
I can't wait to hear the answer to this question.
I think the hardest thing about Trek is the canon of it. It is there's such a legacy. 60 years almost, right? And it's a passionate fan base, and there is so much history that you have to be aware of and that you have to play into. And so I think that's always a big challenge. I think also, each show is so tonally different to what you said. The Strange New Worlds definitely is sort of a TOS era, although Discovery was too for a little while, right? And so, writing that line where it's it's Discovery, it's not the same show, but it is the same era. When we jumped ahead, then that's a different conversation, because now all of a sudden you're laying canon down for the first time. So you're making new tracks in the snow, so to speak, which is fun. But again, very scary, because, all along the way, you got to make sure that you get it right. The fans will absolutely let you know if this doesn't make sense in the Trekverse. And so it's something that we take very seriously because, it's something that's very special to a lot of people.
Alex, with Discovery ending, that's a big moment, because it was, in a way, the flagship Trek series for this whole new wave of shows that you've spearheaded. And it was the one that brought Trek back there in 2017. And now that it's wrapped, what do you hope that people will take away and remember about it, and what the show will have as its legacy?
I don't think any of the Trek shows that exist now could exist if Discovery hadn't. It was the first to kick in the door. I think it took the most fire because it was doing lots of new things. It was breaking ground. But I think, it's interesting when you talk to members of, let's say, the Next Generation cast, and you hear about how that show was first received, and then how it grew over time to be many, many people's favorite Star Trek show. I think time becomes the great equalizer when it comes to legacy, obviously. And I'm so proud of the show because I think that it took enormous leaps and bounds, not just for Star Trek, but for sci-fi, for streaming in the area of representation. I think that it took hugely bold swings in terms of its storytelling. Jumping, 1,000 years into the future was a huge risk that could have just both ended Discovery, and it could have ended any future Star Trek shows, but in fact, it paved the way for more. And it was embraced, which is a huge thing, I believe Star Trek can only go on if you take big, bold swings. If you play it safe, it won't last. And that is going to get a lot of reaction, right? It's the nature of Trek fandom to react and to have a big debate about what you like or don't like about Star Trek. That's the point. That's what it means to be a Star Trek fan. I think that's a good thing. I think that aside from the fact that the show did break extraordinary ground, it is the greatest cast I've ever worked with. Just to a person across the board. Everybody was a joy. Sonequa Martin Green is one of the most amazing probably the most amazing number one I've ever had the pleasure of working with. She just brought such kindness, clarity, professionalism to every day. Even when she was having hard days, she did not show it to people. And everybody followed suit. And that is very rare. Very, very rare.
One of the things that I love that Gene Roddenberry did from the very beginning was that he established this template for an aspirational future, one where, there are certain ideals that we've achieved and a level of diversity and harmony and peace that, we all aspire to. But at the same time, he also used Star Trek to hold up a mirror to what was happening in the real world in our time as well. How much of the real world and commenting on the real world do you bring in and balance that with those more aspirational aspects?
Well, first of all, I value my relationship with Rod so much because I think that he gives us the freedom to explore and to claim a certain authority over Star Trek, because we all understand that Star Trek belongs to his father and to the fans. That's who it really belongs to. So we're all stewards of it in the meantime, right? And our goal is to take care of it and to treat it like a very precious egg and then hand it on to the next person, and hopefully they'll treat it like a very precious egg. And, one of the great things that Gene did was, in creating this perfect template that is so timeless, was lean into what is truly wonderful about science fiction and genre storytelling, which is it's always an allegory or a metaphor for what's going on now. It's never really about the future. It's about now. And so Gene was able to tell stories about civil rights and race and any number of things through the prism of Star Trek. And we endeavor to continue to do that all the time now. Every episode is filtered through that prism. Whenever anybody asks me, what's the most important thing about Star Trek? What's the one core tenet? The answer for me is very simple, and the answer is optimism. It must always return to optimism. And it doesn't mean you can't go into darker places, right? He saw it coming in the 21st century. There were dark things in TOS, but at the end of the day, you always have to go through darkness to get into light. And this idea that we have all the things that are dividing us now are in the rearview mirror, and our better angels have led us to that future that he envisioned, is the compass that points us toward the better people that we can be. And to me, that is why Star Trek is timeless and will go on forever, is that we will always need that as a compass. Always, always, always. There's always going to be another problem, another issue that needs to be tackled and interpreted and understood by a generation and then the generation that comes after it. And Star Trek is the prism that gets us to do that in a way that's palatable and thoughtful and emotional, and it elevates our thinking. That's incredibly rare, to entertain people at this level, but also to elevate their thinking and to somehow do it like a magic trick invisibly while you're entertaining them. I mean, that's the best it gets.
Well, that is, I think what we should wrap up here, because that is just a fantastic note to end on, really. But just as one final thought, what you described there is like why Star Trek has endured so well and why it will endure decades from now. But I'm just curious for you guys, like, where do you see yourselves 5 years from now for Star Trek? Where when we're doing this panel 5 years from now and we're all back here at the Grove, what are we going to be talking about? What do you hope for then? And just broad strokes.
I don't have a good answer for that, other than probably talking to Alex about a shot or getting a text from him and working through some edit or something like that.
Usually on a Saturday or Sunday.
Usually on a Saturday
Hey, you're
or
not
Sunday.
doing anything on your weekend, right? We can talk about visual effects shots. My hope is that the universe can continue to grow, but that it will only grow if we have new stories to tell and ways to innovate Star Trek. That's really all I care about, honestly. I think the journey has been both wonderful, but also, as the cliche says, the destination, because making these shows as hard as they are is such a joy. Fundamentally, we get to do such exciting things creatively, and I would say that I hope 5 years from now, first of all, I hope 5 years from now the world is less bumpy. I'm not confident that will be the case, but I really hope that it is. And if it is less bumpy, then maybe Star Trek will get a little more boring, which wouldn't be a bad thing, because we wouldn't have so much conflict to have to interpret. I hope that Star Trek can continue to be the lens that allows us to understand who we are.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.